All right, folks. Thought I would cover a couple topics here in a couple videos for you on chapter one. One, I'd like to talk about this endosymbiotic hypothesis because they kind of gloss over it a little bit in your book, and I think it's a little more interesting um, than what they show here. And maybe because they're going to spend some time talking about cells in the coming chapters, so they don't spend a lot of time talking about individual organelles. But let's see. Let me see if I can enter a new slide here and then show this slide and see if I can draw on it. Oh, I gotta turn my pad around here. All right. So when we're looking at this endosymbiotic hypothesis, the whole point of chapter one is to kind of get you up to speed of what we know about microorganisms and a little bit about some folks that discovered some things about them, a little bit of evolution and things like that. So with the endosymbiotic hypothesis, what we're talking about are origins of um, ultimately the mitochondria and chloroplasts itself. These hydrogenosomes, um, those are some special organelles and some protists that I won't worry too much about. I'll focus mostly on the mitochondria and the chloroplasts. Um, but the things we know about mitochondria, for instance, are they are these double membraned organelles, right? And so they exist inside of a cell. This is not an individual cell. This is just a mitochondria that's in a cell. And usually when I ask students, what does a mitochondria do? Or what is a mitochondria? Most students will say powerhouse, right? Powerhouse of the cell. Well, what does that mean? What it means is the mitochondria makes ATP, and when it makes ATP, the cells use that ATP for energy. That's the mitochondria. Well, what we notice is that when you look at a mitochondria, this membrane, this outer membrane, it looks like a eukaryotic. Whoops. Ugh, that's why I hate this pen. Eukaryotic. Well, I'm going to stop writing that. Looks like a eukaryotic membrane. Um, and if you know anything about cells at all, you'll know that we typically divide them into two groups, the prokaryotes and the eukaryotes. Um, so the prokaryotes are things with no nucleus. Um, eukaryotes have a nucleus. Eukaryotes have mitochondria. Eukaryotes have, uh, I'm blanking on the name, rough ER and smooth ER and Golgi, right? All those things are in eukaryotes. Prokaryotes really have no membrane-bound nucleus. They do have some ribosomes, although eukarya has ribosomes too, right? And so when you look at the membranes between the two, they are also different. And we'll spend the next coming chapters talking about prokaryotes and eukaryotes and how their membranes are different. But when you look at this outer membrane, it looks like a eukaryotic membrane. When you look at this inner membrane, it looks like a prokaryotic membrane, right? And so if you think about that, what we think happened is that the squiggly part in there, right, may have been its own free existing cell, right? And then the smooth part was its own organism. And so what happened is this organism, whatever it was, engulfed this particular organism. So now it lives inside here, right? And that developed into a mitochondria, right? The other thing that we see, let me do some, let me erase a little bit here. See if I can draw a mitochondria a little bigger. Right? The other thing we see in mitochondria, right? And so remember, this is one organelle, not a cell. The other thing we see in mitochondria is the DNA inside is circular. That's very much like prokaryotic organisms. It divides on its own. It doesn't matter what the cell's doing, that particular mitochondria will divide on its own. It grows a little bit It goes through a process that's very similar to bacterial replication, which we call binary fission. Um, and so all those things kind of led us to believe that probably mitochondria used to be their own organisms that cells have engulfed and used for their benefit. Same thing goes with chloroplasts, right? The difference being chloroplasts are green, right? So chloroplasts still have kind of this double membrane system, and actually they have more membranes inside, right? We won't worry too much about um, structure yet. But again, very similar. Outer membrane looks eukaryotic, inner membrane looks prokaryotic, has circular DNA inside that is replicated and divides on its own, so on and so forth. And so that's the endosymbiotic theory that essentially these organelles, the or the mitochondria and the chloroplasts, were engulfed. They were free living organisms before, and they were engulfed by some other organism and then essentially used for energy, right? That's what both of them do. They give and help cells store or use energy, right? And so, um, very interesting theory, I would say, endosymbiosis. I think your book glossed over it a little bit, and so I wanted to spend just a few minutes there. And then next, I'll talk some about Koch's postulates.